Okay, so a little while back I received this interesting email, supposedly from a gentleman, a great citizen named Jose Peterson. Where was I? Oh yes, Jose Peterson, who on his deathbed wants me to take charge of his fortune, blah blah, charity, obvious advance fee scam setup. Let's go scam baiting again. Before we start, let's just cover one point of admin. If you like this video and subscribe, please understand this isn't the only type of content I make for this channel. In fact, most of my content is on other topics. I'm just saying this because I do get a few confused comments about why people receive my other stuff in their feed. Feel free to skip anything you don't like, or, don't subscribe if variety annoys you. Anyway, on with the scam baiting. Objectives for this little venture will be: waste the scammer's time, confound and annoy him, and also we'll try to get the scammer to reveal his bank details, then we'll report him. So away we go. I often find it useful to make my first response one of almost refusal. I feel like it really gets the scammer on the hook if you play so innocent that you wouldn't dream of just taking the fortune supposedly on offer. So I replied to Peterson, telling him I wasn't sure why he'd contacted me and that my financial situation was too difficult to enable me to donate to his charity. This might have been too much of a brush-off, as he didn't reply, so I just fired off a quick email to say, what do you want me to do next? Peterson replied, thanking me for accepting to help him with his dying plight, reiterating his story about dying of coronary artery disease, and also whittering on to the effect that this was some sort of deathbed repentance thing, where he now realised he hadn't cared enough for people, but had now seen the error of his ways, and since his own family had refused to help him make amends, he was calling upon me, random internet guy, to help. There was a bit of religious boilerplate in there, and some attached documents which I was supposed to use when contacting his lawyer to prove that I was indeed the proper custodian of the funds, which, by the way, is $500,000 US. Nah, I've had bigger. His closing paragraph said something about hoping his trust wouldn't be washed down a canal. That sounds like an idiom lost in translation. I guess we could probably use that to narrow down the country of origin of this scammer. Anybody got any ideas? So in my next response I played dumb, my favourite game, repeating my earlier protest that I could not donate to any charities, but also reassuring him there were no canals nearby, so not to worry about that. No response, so I asked him if he was still alive. Peterson never responded again after that, but now I had an email from the lawyer character. Silva Morrison Carlos, or maybe Carlos Morrison Silva, or something else. One thing I know about scammers is they're never very sure about first and last names. Carlos provided the usual email template asking for personal details of the sort you really shouldn't share with strangers on the internet. He promised that the inheritance would be paid to me either as a cheque or as a prepaid ATM card. That's right, a prepaid ATM card for $500,000. I totally believe those exist. He said that the scan of my ID was optional. That was fortunate, as I really didn't want to go to all the trouble of creating a fake passport like I did for Manuel. Rather than providing my fake ID info, I decided to divert the conversation into an inquiry about Peterson. Was he okay? Carlos responded, mostly to ask for the details he'd already requested, but also mentioning that due to Peterson's health issue, he is often restricted. That should have cleared up the matter, but somehow it didn't. I wrote about my concern as to why Carlos should restrict Peterson, and please would he stop restricting him while there's still time. Carlos tried to explain my misunderstanding, bless, and again asked for the details he'd requested before. So here are my fake victim details. My name is Baron Montague Julius Fiona Tuttle. My address is a completely fictitious but plausibly real address in a location not very near me, but near enough that I can describe the locality later if I need to. Age 56, nationality British, occupation Baron of the Hamble and Solent lands and the southern pastures. I also gave him the phone number of my throwaway prepaid SIM card, as well as a vague excuse as to why it would be switched off if he ever tried to call me without prior arrangement. I wasn't ever to hear from Peterson again, but I did write him a sympathetic note. I'm fairly sure there were two scammers at work here, one hooking victims, the other reeling them in. I had hoped to play them off against each other, but sadly not this time. Nothing from Carlos the lawyer, so I sent a slightly impatient reminder. Then I got a very, very standard and probably templated email from Carlos saying that all paperwork will be taken care of, there's no hidden charges or fee, then also saying that a payment of $300 would be necessary to activate Peterson's account. Because, that's what banks obviously do. If you just leave money in an account, they won't let you take it out until you put some more in. That totally makes sense, right? There was lots more pointless waffle and padding about how the prepaid ATM card would supposedly work and about the option to withdraw the fund as a cashier's cheque. So how can we derail this conversation? How about nitpicking the contradiction between there being no fee and there being a fee? So that's what I did. I wrote as if it was probably just a typo on his part and asked him to correct it. I also inquired about Peterson. You can tell when a scammer's starting to get a bit shirty. They drop the greetings and the signature off the email and just write lines of response. That's what Carlos did, trying to explain, badly, what he'd meant, and telling me that I needed to activate the account. So I said, look, just to make it simple, just take the $300 out of the fund. I don't know why you need me to suggest this. Again, an email but with no greeting or sign-off from Carlos saying that no transaction can be made on our dormant account. I was not ready to let this matter go just yet, so I suggested that he just use a deferment account from his organisation and bill me later for the fee. And also, how is Peterson? Carlos wasn't going to budge on the fee. I mean, this is obvious because the fee, that is, the demand for me to send him $300, is the only thing he sincerely wants, being an advance fee scammer. So I suggested we just use one of my own accounts, which was already active. I think this confused him, as he just responded, "Okay, sir, what do you suggest?" So I gave him the details of my fictitious but plausible bank account. He responded to say, "I don't know if you understand me, sir. The account is dormant, so no transaction can be made until it's reactivated." I just said, "I think it's you who doesn't understand me. Use a different account. Problem solved." I thought maybe I'd pushed too hard, so I backed up a bit so we could start on a new but equally unproductive sidetrack, and I offered to send the $300. Carlos seemed so excited by this that his caps lock button got stuck on and he instructed me to send the money via MoneyGram. To his supposed bank account officer, he gave enough information about this person that I was able to track down her actual address and her Facebook page. So I responded, hoping to shake the scammer up a bit, stating that by amazing coincidence, my daughter was a personal acquaintance of the bank officer. I provided an address part that wasn't part of the information he'd given me. He just shrugged it off. Oh well, it was worth a try. A new tactic was required, so I visited a website. I think it was called Scambaiting's Toolbox. I'll put a link in the video description. And I downloaded a fake MoneyGram security questionnaire, which is, by the way, a lot of fun, as amongst other things it asks the respondent to colour in their fingertips with ballpoint pen in order to provide fingerprints for the form. I sent this to Carlos, stating that Natasha would have to fill it in before I could transfer the fee. Carlos just said I would have to find a different way to send the fee. I just used this as an opportunity to express doubt about the scammers and suggested maybe the bank could assign a more competent person. No response from Carlos for 24 hours, so I sent a quick chaser. Another 24 hours and still no response, so I chased again. In truth, all I want here is a more satisfying conclusion than the scammer simply withdrawing. I can't end this video like that. Carlos replied with a brand new contact and asking me to pay by bank transfer to BB&T Bank. So the first thing I did was report this account to BB&T, along with the rest of the email discussion thread. The second thing I did was act confused and ask Carlos why he'd changed horses. He didn't reply, so I ramped up the annoyance and I expressed my disappointment at his failure. I also made an excuse about how I could not make offshore transfers for reasons I've been instructed not to discuss with strangers, and I offered to pay by two alternative methods, Spondule and Money Purple. Carlos eventually responded to complain about my inability to pay the $300 and in seeming desperation offered another payment method, gift cards. I replied to point out that a gift card would not be appropriate as this was not a gift, it was a fee, pretending I had no idea how that would work. I also voiced my concern about the constant changing of payment method and asked Carlos if he knew what he was doing. This made Carlos a bit cross and he told me not to doubt his competence, and again asking for payment by gift card or Western Union. I have a rule. Respond to aggression not with compliance but with righteous indignation. So I told Carlos that his competence was in question, argued that it was him, not me, that was being awkward, and told him once again to get the MoneyGram form filled in and returned. Carlos made some really lame excuses that Natasha could not fill in the form because she was unavoidably indisposed. I decided to pour on a bit more indignation and just complained about the vague explanation and the ridiculous unprofessionalism of asking for a payment by gift card, and finishing off by suggesting that we might need to delay the transaction until Natasha's availability, or until Carlos could find a competent assistant. Carlos surprised me by now offering a new contact and a bank account for making the payment, someone called Kevin. I promised Carlos I would transfer the money to Kevin's account, then I went straight to the bank's website and using their chat function, I reported Kevin's account for fraud. The next day, I told Carlos I'd transferred the money and asked for confirmation when Kevin received it. Of course, this confirmation would never happen as I didn't transfer any money. Carlos asked for confirmation of the payment. This is pretty standard, but I couldn't be bothered to fake any documents at this stage. So I made an excuse. I told Carlos there was no transaction slip, but I could see the transfer in my banking app, but I could not provide any document. Carlos insisted on getting confirmation of payment and suggested I should make a screenshot from my online banking app. Clearly he was pretty eager to get his hands on my money. I told him I didn't know how to do that, but I would visit the bank and ask for help. Carlos chased me for an update the next day, but I just made another excuse saying that the banking app disables screenshots. Actually, that is true of most banking apps, and that I could not provide documentation, so he should just get Kevin to confirm receipt. Carlos insisted that I provide documentation, now arguing that I should check my emails for evidence of the transfer and forward that, or take a photo of my banking app using a different device. I told him to stop making such a drama out of this and get Kevin to confirm receipt. I thought this might be a good chance to inject a bit of suspicion and ask whether Carlos really trusted Kevin. Carlos insisted that this is all standard and he was only doing his job. An hour or two later, Carlos chased me in for an update and asked for the transaction ID. Again, I responded to aggression with righteous indignation, so I complained that he was being pushy and that he was being difficult when he could just ask Kevin for the evidence. I also pointed out there wouldn't be any email receipt of the transfer because my bank doesn't just email me every time a transaction is made. Carlos wanted that money though, so he asked for the transaction amount and ID. So I just made one up. Unsurprisingly, Carlos said there was no such transaction in the receiving account and asked once again for some kind of evidence. Time to throw him a little bone. So, using my highly expert graphic design skills and professional tools, I mocked up a plausible image of a banking app, showing the transfer details. I dropped this image on my phone, opened it with a photo viewer, and then took a picture of the screen using a different camera. Now that I was able to send this fake evidence, I was also able to pile on a bit more ridicule and indignation, asking if Carlos was playing games and suggesting that he'd lost my money. Carlos just thanked me and promised to get back to me. The next day, he emailed me to say that the payment had not yet been credited at the receiving end, and telling me to contact the bank and get them to sort the issue. I asserted that I'd been to the bank, who had confirmed the transfer was complete, and the funds should be showing in the receiving account. I also said that in order to kick off a proper investigation, I would need a copy of the statement of account from Kevin's bank account. Carlos fell back to an argument that I hadn't proven payment, suggesting that I might have made a typo. Well, I asked for his statement first, and I really didn't have the energy to mock up an entire bank statement, so I replied with an accusation that maybe Kevin could not be trusted, and stating that I think someone is scamming someone else here. I also added a little scare to say that I'd heard something about internet scams, and maybe that was what was happening here. Carlos assured me that Kevin could be trusted and asked for the confirmation of the bank account and sort code I'd paid the funds to. I just said I hadn't made any mistakes and asked him if he was sure the details he'd given me were correct. He was sure that he hadn't made a mistake, but now he also began calling the payment contact Kelvin. I promised I would go back to the bank and get printed evidence. I had no intention of providing any documents, though. Too much hard work. I voiced my doubt that the document would help and said I was suspicious that someone was being dishonest. Carlos went a bit soft and apologised, but also asked for the payment slip. I just let him stew for a day, and he chased me again for the payment slip. I replied to say that the bank was unable to provide printed evidence. It's just not something they do. I witted on a bit, just asking what we should do next and asking if he thought it would help if I explained to my bank that this was about Peterson's inheritance. That is, if I naively explained to my bank that this was a scam setup. No reply from Carlos for 2 days, so I chased. I also asked for Kevin's direct contact number or email address. The next email caught me slightly by surprise. Carlos attached a video showing Kevin navigating his banking app, in which, no surprise to me, the transfer was not present. Interestingly though, there was enough information on the other transactions visible in the video for me to conclusively identify Kevin as currently residing in the UK, and find him on Facebook, and find his address. I wasn't really sure where to take this next. I guess I could have reported Kevin to the police, but there just isn't a mechanism for scam baiters like me to hand evidence over. The official stance of the authorities is just don't respond in the first place. I guess they don't want to be seen to be encouraging vigilante activity. Anyway, I said I would show the video to my bank, and meanwhile, how about if I pay the fee via Western Union? Only a few hours later, Carlos chased me for an update. Time to commence the endgame. I told Carlos that I'd checked, and it turns out I didn't actually make the transfer at all way back on the 27th of April. Carlos demanded that I explain the screenshot I'd previously sent, expressing his disappointment that I had spent almost 2 weeks messing him around and demanding to know in shouty caps if I was willing to follow through with the transaction. I just explained that the screenshot was the transfer that never took place. Carlos was getting pretty angry now and wanted to know why I'd insisted that I paid the fee when I hadn't. He said that this had caused him to distrust and doubt Kevin, whose name he couldn't remember properly, calling him Kelvin, and repeating the shouty Caps question. I replied, "Trust is an important thing here, but I thought his name is Kevin, not Kelvin. Please clarify." Fury level now rising, Carlos clarified that it was Kevin, and saying that I didn't seem to be a reliable person, and also repeated his shouty Caps question, in this case adding the phrase, "for the last time." One thing with threats of finality that I like to do when scam baiting is make sure they're not final. So I just said there's an important detail he's ignoring, and did he know what I was talking about? Of course he wanted to know the answer, so I replied, 4, 1, 9. Do you understand what I'm saying? He replied, "I forgive your ignorance." I replied, "I don't forgive your criminal behaviour." That might have been the end, but the next day I thought I'd drop him a quick note to ask, "Any news?" He replied, "How may I be of help to you?" So I thought that's rather an open-ended question, and in my final email to him I said so. And I said what I guess I really wish for is that he would find an honest job. And so that's the end of that little scam baiting session. I hope you found that fun or interesting or something. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.